into Iran with aircraft and surveillance drones as well to take down any drone that's launched long distance or medium range, or any anti-ship missile or a ballistic missile trying to take down ships in the Straits of Hormuz. Then there's a dome defense, Larry, right over the straits themselves. And that dome defense is there to defeat any land-based attack, say a shoulder-fired missile at a ship, any surface fast boats or under the water uncrewed boats, or any penetration that gets through the layered defense. That would be the terminal defense right at the straits. Based on that, for the last couple of weeks, they've been talking to ship owners, ship insurers, and the merchants of the ships that are out there. There's hundreds there. They talked to 2 to 3 dozen of them. They are prepared once they're secure.
What if the most dangerous phase of a conflict is not when the missiles fly, but when the shooting suddenly slows down and the world is told to believe diplomacy is working? In this moment, Iran is signaling it may reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but only on terms that delay the one issue Washington says it cannot delay, the nuclear threat. And according to General Jack Keane, that is exactly where the real danger begins. Because this is not just a negotiation over shipping lanes or sanctions. It is a test of whether pressure will break the regime, or whether the regime is simply buying time, betting that the world will lose its nerve before it loses its power.
Steph, we welcome back to the show General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, as always, it's fabulous to have you here. Let's just start. What do you make of the Navy move now? It's sort of like formally reopening the Gulf, letting ships through. We did a couple today. Our reporting, Jennifer Griffin and others, they're going to be ramping up more and more ships. How do you see that?
Yeah, well, it's a major decision by the president. Obviously, the Iranians shut down the Straits of Hormuz. They wanted to stop the war. They got that. The president thought, based on some preliminary thoughts about negotiations, he entered into it. He's given them 3 weeks to come up with something that's acceptable. There's nothing that they have come up with that's acceptable to our president. He's not going to take a bad deal. He's made another big decision: open the Straits of Hormuz. And that's what's happening. This is a very complex and comprehensive operation that our viewers are not going to really see much of, or even reporting much of, because it starts with one, they've already done it. They've cleared a channel close to Oman, which is the country across from Iran, some 21 miles across. There's no mines there, so there's a pathway through it. Secondly, a layered defense that goes scores of miles deep into Iran with aircraft and surveillance drones as well to take down any drone that's launched long distance or medium range, or any anti-ship missile or a ballistic missile trying to take down ships in the Straits of Hormuz. Then there's a dome defense, Larry, right over the straits themselves. And that dome defense is there to defeat any land-based attack, say a shoulder-fired missile at a ship, any surface fast boats or under the water uncrewed boats, or any penetration that gets through the layered defense. That would be the terminal defense right at the straits. Based on that, for the last couple of weeks, they've been talking to ship owners, ship insurers, and the merchants of the ships that are out there. There's hundreds there. They talked to 2 to 3 dozen of them. They are prepared, once they're secured, to begin to move their ships through. Supposedly tonight, they will move some ships through, and it's getting nighttime right now in that part of the world. And as predicted by Admiral Cooper and others, who's the commander of our forces, it's likely the Iranians will retaliate to try to intervene in terms of what we're doing at the Straits, but also frustrated with the defense that we have, they likely will retaliate on allies or partners and U.S. bases. And that, as you recorded here, they have fired 12 ballistic missiles into the UAE and 3 cruise missiles, as just announced by the defense minister. In my judgment, that's a major violation of the ceasefire, and I think we're going back into a campaign, big and powerful, to bring down all the other targets that we have not brought down.
Military campaign.
Military
Combat
campaign. Bombing. And also, we have to recognize that dealing with Hezbollah in Lebanon by Israel, there's been over 50 ceasefire violations by Hezbollah. And according to the terms of the agreement, Israel is in a defensive crouch, only allowed to conduct defense against what's targeting them. This should remove, based on what the Iranians have done, the ceasefire hold on them. So Netanyahu should be given the green light once and for all, finish the campaign against Hezbollah. Let's end it on Israeli terms.
Do you think the Iranians would be stupid enough to fire on our Navy, on our ships?
Oh, absolutely.
You're talking about this dome, for example, whatever, whether they're these little motorboats or whatever missiles they have left. You think they'll actually do that?
They'll try. I mean, they did. That's what prompted it in 1988. Now, they were a different military then. They don't have the capability they have now. They did fire on U.S. ships, and that's prompted Ronald Reagan to take action against them, to bring down the small little navy they had and attack some oil platforms. It was predictable that they would do something quickly here out of frustration. So, listen, President Trump has called their bluff here, and he's put down a marker. And we're going to open up the straits, and that is the only card these guys are holding. And he's about to take it away from them.
And they put up, I haven't seen the whole thing, but apparently their list of conditions doesn't even mention nuclear capabilities, doesn't mention terrorism, doesn't mention all the key things that President Trump absolutely, I think, unconditionally will demand from them. So it's the old story. You've described it many times. They're just playing for time. That's all they're trying to do. They're not serious about any peaceful arrangement.
They never have been. I mean, when they went to the ceasefire, when we went to the ceasefire, they got what they wanted. You and I have talked about it. Stop the war. They got that. We went into negotiating mode, and they were playing that card. And they were tantalizing, I think, many of our negotiators with the promise, these are moderate, quote, people willing to make a deal and putting likely some serious concessions on the table just to incentivize the discussion. But when it really gets down to making a decision, as we quickly found out after the first negotiation, and they had a check with the boss, the IRGC commander, he said thumbs down on all of that. And the negotiations were over. They're not going to make any deal that's acceptable to our president, and he's not about to make a bad deal.
Right.
You can see what he's about to do. He's opening up the Straits of Hormuz, and he'll eventually return to the bombing as well.
It just seemed like opening up the strait, putting the Navy in there, getting the ships, it's the first step. And the next step is probably going to be military operation, some kind of specific targeting as you've described. I don't know, it may be Cargo Island, it may not be, but it'll be something. He's lost patience. But the IRGC they're crazy people. I mean, they have a death wish. Now, speaking of their death wish, is it possible at some point, we're starving them, the blockade and the embargo, the no money coming in, they can't pay payrolls, they own businesses, they're not going to be able to pay a payroll there, retirement accounts, the Treasury is freezing or seizing their own assets offshore. At what point is it possible that the citizenry will, just step up and do something? And just one more, sir, as a corollary, the so-called regular army, the ones that were drafted, not the IRGC, which we've talked about, could anything happen there to overthrow completely this regime?
Yeah, as a regime, well, first of all, they believe they can outlast us. They don't care about the suffering of the people. The leaders, all they care about is surviving. They believe eventually they can recover. It may take years, but surviving is the objective. So, yes, as the fissures and fractures start to take place, I strongly believe that what is needed now is the CIA and Mossad to come together with a combined plan presented at some level of detail to the President of the United States to do two big things. One, undermine the regime, and two, assist the Iranians. There is no internal pressure on them, and let's apply it. There's huge external pressure. Obviously, we and the Israelis are applying it. Let's get some real internal pressure going. Let's get some chain reaction going on the mind of the people, particularly as the regime becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. We don't have an objective for a regime change publicly, but privately, we should be working our tails off to achieve that end covertly and clandestinely. I mean, think about it. People in the IRGC, they're wondering, are we going to survive or not? Somebody approaches them and say, listen, are you willing to work with me? I got $50,000 in my pocket. Here's what I need you to do. Does the Mossad do that? You betcha. They do that. They have done that. We need to do more of it. We need to talk to the Iranians. There are people under arms right now in Iran. Kurds, Azaris, and Baluchis. We got to green light them. And maybe we get a chain reaction going in the country with people who are not under arms, but also willing to come into the streets. We can keep the adversary off their back because we got we own the sky. I'm talking, we're going back to full combat operations.
So it's different than in the past.
It's different than in the past. They're not out there alone.
So what about the so-called regular army? We've talked about this in passing from time to time. Is there anything to that?
The regular army is made up of draftees, and the people who lead the regular army are more nationalists than they are these diabolical tyrants that submit to the Ayatollah ideology. So there has always been an opportunity there. And yes, I am confident the Mossad has contacts in that organization. And they have never, Larry, during all the oppression that we've seen them do of their people, they have never asked the army to go on the streets. Why? Because they know the draftees and the leaders would not fire on their own people. And they didn't want to see that public rejection of their orders.
Back to the probable next step of resumption of bombing. And I agree with your point of view wholeheartedly, have for quite some time. People say it would be 2 weeks. The CENTCOM knows what it needs to do, hadn't been able to do it yet, but they're ready to do it. Does that all sound reasonable to you, the 2-week time period?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
I mean, I don't hate to put a time frame on it.
2 weeks is full throttle everything. I think there's likely options that are being given to the president in terms of scale and magnitude of it. And the timelines are less important than what we're going to do. But listen, so our audience understands, since when we started the operation, we have been still moving resources into the region, just not the additional carrier strike group. We've been moving fighters and other capability into the region. We have doubled the amount of capability that we have in the region now compared to then. And the Israelis have always had more capability there than we have. When we went to a ceasefire, they had conducted 19,000 attacks on the Iranians. We conducted 13,000. We're about where they are. So what we have in front of us in terms of sheer power is very, very significant. And all of Iran's major targets, to include energy infrastructure, Carg Island, ballistic missile storage sites, and you name it, are very vulnerable to what we're about.
And that's your expectation?
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
So we may start out a little slower because this operation in front of us is absorbing huge amount of resources to make it successful. But I think we're going to get there for sure.
Yes, sir. General Jack Keane, it's wonderful having you on set, sir. Thank you for helping us throughout this whole period. You've been great. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Larry.
All right, folks.
And that is what makes this moment far bigger than a routine television interview or a standard policy update. What General Jack Keane is really describing here is not a breakthrough in diplomacy, but a dangerous pause in a struggle where each side is trying to control time itself. On paper, Iran's proposal sounds tactical, even reasonable to some observers. Reopen the Strait of Hormuz, reduce immediate pressure, and deal with the nuclear question later. But Keane's warning is that the order of those steps is the story. Because if the blockade weakens before the regime gives up its most important leverage, then what appears to be de-escalation may actually become survival. And for a government already under pressure, survival is everything. From Keane's perspective, Tehran is not negotiating toward compromise. It is negotiating toward endurance. That distinction matters. A regime seeking compromise gives something up in exchange for relief. A regime seeking endurance gives just enough to slow the pressure while preserving its core objective. And in this case, Keane believes that core objective has not changed. He argues that Iran is not going to meet the Central American demand for an acceptable nuclear outcome, and instead is trying to drag the clock forward, hoping that economic stress, political fatigue, and international hesitation will eventually weaken Washington's will. In other words, the battlefield may look quieter, but the strategy has not softened. It has simply become slower, colder, and more patient. That is why his most important phrase may be the simplest one in the entire interview: that is not sustainable. He is referring to the blockade's impact on Iran's economy, especially the idea that 80% of the regime's revenue is being denied. In normal political systems, that kind of pressure would force urgent concessions. But Keane's warning is that this regime does not behave like a normal political system. It does not measure success by public comfort, economic stability, or even immediate popularity. It measures success by staying alive, holding control, and refusing humiliation. If that means ordinary people face shortages, gas lines, blackouts, and deepening hardship, he suggests the leadership will absorb that cost. Why? Because in his view, the regime has already shown that the suffering of its own people is not a red line. Survival of power is. And that shifts the entire meaning of negotiation. If the people across the table do not fear domestic pain the way democracies do, then the pressure campaign has to be understood differently. It cannot rely on the assumption that public suffering automatically creates political moderation. Sometimes it creates desperation, sometimes it creates repression, and sometimes, as Keane implies, it creates a regime even more determined not to bend. That is why he pushes the argument beyond talks and toward force. He is not saying simply that diplomacy is slow. He is saying diplomacy may be functioning here as cover. Cover for delay, cover for repositioning, cover for a regime waiting out a moment of maximum vulnerability. Then the interview gets even darker when the focus moves to internal Iranian power. Keane points to Ahmad Vahidi and the IRGC as the center of real control, suggesting that the formal political channels may not even be where the true decisions are being made. That changes the entire map of the crisis. Because if military hardliners, not diplomatic faces, are effectively calling the shots, then every negotiation may already be constrained before it begins. And if those negotiators are speaking under the authority of men whose worldview is built on resistance, martyrdom, and coercive survival, then compromise becomes even less likely. In that light, the diplomatic process starts to look less like a bridge to peace and more like a hallway with no exit. And beyond Iran itself, Keane widens the frame to something even more consequential: the partnership linking Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea. This is where the story stops being only about one country and becomes about a network of states that see American hesitation as opportunity. Russia wants Iran preserved as a foothold in the Middle East. China benefits from Iranian oil and from any geopolitical arrangement that keeps US power stretched and distracted. North Korea sits inside the same wider pattern of revisionist states testing the edges of American resolve. In that sense, this is not merely a standoff over one waterway or one sanctions regime. It is part of a larger contest over whether pressure still works, whether deterrence still means anything, and whether a coalition of hardline powers can outlast the West by coordinating patience. So the deeper tension in this video is not whether negotiations are technically still alive. The deeper tension is whether they are alive in any meaningful sense. Keane's answer is brutally clear. Talks without movement are not peace, and pauses without disarmament are not stability. They are intervals, breathing space, strategic delay. And in conflicts like this, delay is never neutral. Delay helps one side prepare, regroup, and preserve what matters most. That is why this moment feels so gripping. Because the world always wants to believe the danger is passing when the temperature drops. But sometimes the temperature drops only because the fire has moved underground. And that may be the real warning here. The Strait of Hormuz can reopen. Meetings can continue. Statements can sound measured. But if the central threat remains untouched, then what the world is watching is not resolution. It is postponement. And that is where your audience leans in. Because this is no longer just about Iran, Trump, a blockade, or a TV interview. It becomes a bigger human question about how power behaves when cornered. Does pressure force surrender, or does it harden resolve? Does diplomacy prevent war, or merely delay the next phase of it? And if the people in charge truly do not care what their own population endures, then how exactly does the world force change before the cost becomes even greater? That is the cliff edge this story leaves us on. Not certainty, not calm. just a moment where the world has to decide whether it is watching the beginning of a settlement or the final pause before a much harder confrontation. And maybe that is the reason this story matters so much, because in conflicts like this, the loudest warning is not always an explosion. Sometimes it is a proposal that sounds just reasonable enough to make everyone forget what still has not been solved. If you are still watching, ask yourself one thing: is this diplomacy or delay? Because the answer to that question may decide what comes next, not just for Iran, but for the entire region. And if you want more high-stakes breakdowns where the headlines end and the real story begins, stay with us until the next one.